Well, it's about that time right here on KAZ Radio, where we have one of the most hottest shows every single Sunday at 3, but now it's 3:45, with none other than my friends and yours. What's going on with Lady D and Sir John? Take it away, Lady D.
This is part two.
This is part two, yes. We got a part two of our show today, Sunday, and we just thank you for coming back and joining with us. We have a wonderful author on.
Yes.
Today,
yes.
Cynthia Harris Allen has written a wonderful book called The Cricket Cries, The Year Changed.
Yeah.
And this book is just phenomenal. I've heard a lot of great talk about this book and you as an author and how you have taken us back into history and slavery. So, and this is really excellent because this is also Black History Month.
Yes.
So we really appreciate that. So, further ado, we're going to go ahead and Cynthia, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
And tell us about Cynthia Allen.
I'm a native Clevelander, graduate of John Adams High School, the old one that was torn down and rebuilt.
All right.
I'm from a family of 6 sisters and brothers, mother and father. I have 3 children grown, 10 grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
And I'm retired from corporate life. I used to have my own insurance agency. I was a mortgage lender for Bank of America and a credit analyst.
This is also.
Oh, wow. So you did a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, you've been well-rounded in everything. And that's great because we've also came from the banking world and we're still in the banking and mortgage
industry.
Yes. Yes.
So you can retire then.
Yeah. I plan on doing that. Okay, we have to plant those seeds though, right? Right. So tell us how long, how did you become planting your seeds?
How you become a writer?
I've always loved to write. I read books since I was 5 years old. My favorite place to visit was the library.
Okay.
My favorite card in my wallet is my library card.
Okay.
Because it opens up avenues and resources where you can find out things that you don't know, and it empowers you to understand and judge something maybe in a different light.
Right.
And I always had a love of learning, a love of history, especially history about Black people.
Mm-hmm.
I did my family tree through Ancestry.com, Heritage Quest, and Family Search. And I actually found the still intact plantation in Monroe, Georgia, where my ancestors came from, the William Harris Jones homestead.
Wow.
Still intact?
It's still intact. It's a historic monument, National Register.
That is really awesome. That is awesome. Man. So tell me, when did you realize that you wanted to become a writer? At what age?
Probably 6. 6 years
6
old.
years
I wrote
old?
poems about bugs and flies and,
Right.
2 or 3 liners about roses. And, we used to burn ants underneath magnifying glasses and we'd write about them curling up and, being crispy when we were done during the day. So, yeah.
And I want to know, so
Crispy ants.
what gets you, where do you get your information from? Because this book here, and I want to get into this book because the story.
It's telling y'all a whole lot.
There's a lot of different stories, and you've used a lot of different characters. Where did you get your characters from? Where did you come up with this idea for this book?
It was heaven sent. That's all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
I've had experiences with how I felt about reading stories about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going to school, they might have had 2 sentences about slavery in the books that we read.
Right.
Today, the mindset is far away from it because it's not an easy subject for people to talk, or not an easier subject for a younger generation to even appreciate, because the further they go away from it, it seems like the sky opened up, then all we were slaves. We never had any history. We weren't kings or queens or inventors or villages that took care of their children, And so they feel that our history began as being slaves. and that really bothered me.
Right.
So when I was growing up, during the civil rights marches and era, I was more Malcolm than Martin,
Okay.
even though I felt that both had a message to convey, either by either any means necessary or, peaceful protests as well, So sometimes it had to be like a contained rage that we were
Right.
supposed to have, but it was hard to envelop that type of position, knowing
Right.
what was happening to us.
Right.
Okay, so that's how I started. But my most inspiration was I was privileged to have a meeting, a private meeting of some insurance agents. When you sell enough policies, you get a trip or whatever.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And we had a private tour of Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate in Virginia.
Okay.
And we could go wherever we wanted to go on the plantation, okay? And it was just us, just maybe like 52 people on a chartered bus came from D.C. to Mount Vernon. And it changed my life being there. Everybody else was snapping pictures and being happy that, we were on this thing. And I wasn't receiving it that way. Something just came over me. And I went to the back of the plantation, and there were still these row houses of slave cabins
There they are.
made out of adobe. They were shaped like a letter C. So if you were standing where I am, you could see what the last slave was doing way far back.
Right.
Okay? And I stepped inside a lot of them, and they had no chains, but there were still holes in the wall where chains were
Oh, my
at
God.
varying heights. And it came to me, it wasn't like a happy movie song that you get through picking, 100 pounds of cotton, and then
Right.
you go back and sing and say, okay, I guess it's time for me to go to bed. They were all chained together.
They were chained
there-
up. Yeah.
Yes, there was no outhouses, there was no privacy. And the floors were scooped out with two different holes. One was for cooking, and the other one was for using the bathroom.
Bathroom. Your waist.
Oh my God.
So it was in July, maybe it was July 7th or 8th, and it was hot, really hot that day.
Uh-huh.
And this
Now,
stench,
what year was this?
I can't remember, it was like 2000 maybe.
Okay.
And this wind came downwind with this stench, and it dropped me to the ground on my knees. And so when other tourists were coming around, and it caught them as well, and the tour guide said, we cannot get rid of this stench, no matter what we try
Well, it's
to
for
do.
years and years and years and
Right.
years
Okay.
of
And
that.
embedded
Right.
into the soil.
Exactly.
Right. And you got to Mount Vernon. The majority of it used to be a swamp.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very porous land,
Right.
and it holds.
Oh, that's
Holds
interesting.
everything
Mhm.
and needs all the history
Right.
and souls and
Right.
everything's embedded.
Right. And we were invited to eat dinner on Martha's plates inside their home. I couldn't go in there. I could not set foot in it. So it got dark, and they introduced us to the plantation by saying if you do a 360-degree turn, you'll not see any evidence of modern civilization. You won't hear cars coming down the freeway. You won't see cell towers, telephone lines, or anything, because they wanted to maintain the pristine area that was his plantation. And
The heart of his plantation.
yeah, and there were no cherry trees, but there were really old grape arbor vines. They didn't want you to touch them because they would just go like poof. Okay.
Okay.
And they had several open wagons with leather reins that were really weathered. That was
Wow.
supposed to portray his love of horses. Okay. And so I said I couldn't go inside. I just could not go inside. So as it got dark, you couldn't see your hand in front of you. You could not see your hand in front of you.
Wow.
So I stepped away from the place and went around. They had a huge plank porch that came off of this small house too. It was like a house on maybe Glendale or something. It
Okay.
was really small, but the estate, the land itself was tremendous,
Huge.
very vast.
Okay.
And I walked backwards from what I was seeing, and there was like an amber light from the candelabra because there was no electricity in the house.
Okay.
They wanted to keep it real.
Okay.
And all I could see were shadows of people toasting each other with their glasses and stuff, having a good time. And I wasn't against them being on the
Yeah,
other
but
side.
how could
Yeah,
you
right, but it was
celebrate it?
just-
I mean, you did take into the history too, I
Yes.
guess,
Yeah.
and that they're only seeing one side, but.
But
Like
yeah.
I always said, George Washington had another side that people don't really look into,
Right.
and he was a plantation owner.
And the lady introduced our tour by saying that history has yet to record whether George Washington was a good slave owner or a bad slave owner. And I
Well-
said, but the word is slave.
Slave
Right,
owner.
so how
He
can it
was
be?
how could he be good and bad?
Right.
If
If
she's
you-
going to say that, I always tell people a perfect example is people don't know during the Revolution, one of the main regiments of the British had that seemed to always defeat him was led by his body servant who was given to him when he was 6 years old. And that regiment, the first Ethiopian regiment, is still in existence in the British Army and is still one of their special forces units. And he was picked by the British to lead them when he escaped from George Washington, because the British gave any slave that would fight on their side, you have freedom.
Right.
Yeah, and not many people know that. Now.
So I walked away from from the porch.
So that shows you one a good slave owner.
And it was a huge plank porch where I could envision slave trading or black people ordered to gather to sing,
Right.
or it's plantation time and harvest time, or they called it lay-by, where a lot of maintenance was done to the property because they had to wait for the crops to grow. So that period of time was called the lay-by. So it wasn't like you was on a vacation. You just had different types of work to do. So I walked along the plank porch, and then I took off my sandals, and I walked all the way to where I could hear the streams of the Potomac. And I said, I'm going to walk where my ancestors walked. And I walked further and further away from the house, and it was pitch black outside.
Oh my
I could only
goodness.
be redirected to the house because of the candelabra in the window that was glowing would let me know.
Did you walk in the dark?
Mhm.
You wasn't afraid?
No.
It's a very secure location.
I mean, yeah, but
no,
still.
but I just wanted to put my feet where
Where
their
their
feet
feet
were,
were.
and I wanted to look and see what they saw. The gaiety and you being less than a human being type of deal. So when I
Same
came
as
back
you.
home, I said, "There's a story to be had with these. There's stories in all of these cabins." So I started doing research.
Okay.
And went to the library, and I found out how what tribes were taken most from Western Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, some Benin, Togo. Even they would go into the interior, and most of the Africans were getting slaves for the Dutch trading company. And,
East,
okay.
yeah, East,
And then I wanted to get into their religions, because when you think about how could we have not had a mutinous uprising, because there was too many different tribes, too many different languages.
yes.
Okay, where there's
Cultures
communication
and-
cultures. Okay, people worship gods above the ground and below the ground, and
clash.
then there became the white Christianity infusion
Right.
movement to tell you that God ordered you to be a slave and be obedient. Not saying that there was going to be any reward in heaven, or
Right.
just be obedient. So I learned about blacksmiths and dye makers and cloth makers and basket weavers, because all of these people were skilled individuals.
Skilled craftsmen. That's
Right.
what they were taking.
Exactly. But they didn't know that's what they were until they got to the land most of the time, because they remained mute about what they wanted to do, what they did.
Okay.
But against many of them, against their will, because some of them were royalty. They didn't do back-breaking work and
Right.
were whipped and abused and had their kids taken from them, or their kids or daughters and sons raped, and their women raped and whatever. So there was no way that there could have been some type of coming together as a movement, to free themselves. Add to that the cross purposes of their own tribal
Yeah.
necessity to maintain their own identity. So you layer that with the owners, slave owners, the overseers, the drivers, and indentured servants. There's a lot of
Yes.
certain servants serving time on the southern plantations because they were sent from England and whatever.
Yeah.
They did not want to be equated with having to work alongside slaves as well.
Wow.
What's a lot of indentured servants, and not people know that, a lot of the overseers, so they were much as a slave was.
Yes, for sure.
Even worse in some aspects, because indentured servitude is connotation with serfdom. So it's a lot. It was a lot going on, and you're right. There was a lot so many different variations,
All the different
but all
layers.
built to make you not come together.
For sure.
You know,
I always
which breaks down the price of the. You know,
looked at it as the first pandemic of PTSD on American soil came from the slaves. Because you didn't had no peace. You had no peace ever. You know, you were not permitted to have pride about your hygiene. Okay, you were not permitted to worship with your religion. One part of the book, I had the master burn the drums because he didn't know what they were communicating.
you thought they were communicating other
and
things.
they were all the time.
Of course they
all
were.
the time.
But
And the people started beating on their own bodies and beating on trees, still, you know, to maintain that.
To keep
But,
that
right,
because they were being stripped and taken away
Right.
and made
the culture.
forgotten.
Right.
So we're just like the lost souls here.
Well,
Well, you know,
more, but that's what
it's-
that's I think the struggle of slavery and African Americans here is that even though all those things happened, they were able to persevere, and preserve. And even after slavery ended, you had another 100 and some odd years of Jim Crow. So again, they had to persevere and preserve our ancestors and keep their identity.
Right.
I mean, people forget. I mean, it's only been 40-some years since we've been allowed to vote. Really?
yeah.
That ain't that long a time. You know, and now we're going to this parts in this, you know, this last election with voter suppression. So it's like the cycle starting again. It's like, oh, you're going to go. It's only been 40, not even 50 years. It should have been more than that after the Civil War and the 14th Amendment.
Because the 64.
It was a 64, so it's been about 50 years.
Okay.
But it should have been more than that, you know?
I have a lot of people, friends, white, whatever, that would say, well, my father or great-grandfather or grandfather came to this country with just $2. I said, the biggest difference is one word that separates how we
They
came.
wanted to come.
That too, but they arrived with something.
Something.
Yeah,
And we
we came
arrived
with
naked.
as nothing.
And with
That's the
nothing.
difference.
Right.
We arrived
As nothing.
as nothing.
I agree with that.
Okay. So the fight continues to say, you know, like men would say, I am a man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you know, I'm just as equal as any other man. So it's
Right.
like you have to prove that you belong in this society. Why? And there was a African saying that says, first we taught them, and now do we have to teach them again? Because when you study ancient civilization, civilized people.
Civilization
was
started
on
in
a
that,
continent,
right.
Of course. So my biggest problem I had in putting all this together in the book was how I'm going to tell this story.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to know what the master thought, what the overseers thought, what the slaves thought, you know. And I said I have to take it from an omniscient view. So that's why I made the quilt be the person who talked
Talk
about
to the
it.
story.
Because
Okay.
they could tell you what you were thinking, and I could not do that to make it an authentic story because people who review the book, well, how did you know that you thought
Right.
this? So I said I could be the witness for the defense and the prosecution because I know what these people thought because I was Cotton. And Cotton came the quilt that contained 20 pieces of fabric from 20 different slaves' lives that were stitched together.
Wow.
So that's how I could tell their story. And in each story, you will find slaves that they passed by, maybe going to the sugar mill that I wrote a whole story about the next one. So by the end of the book, all of them had known each other, okay, having some type of connection. I learned that blacksmiths in Africa are considered mythical creatures, deity almost, because they create something from nothing that
Wow.
endures. Okay,
Wow.
so it's just a lot of different things. I did more research. It took me more time to do research than to write the book.
How long was your research?
Maybe about 5.5 months,
Okay.
and I was almost at the library or online every day. had a big portfolio about witch doctors. I had a witch doctor
Okay.
on the plantations because these were first generation slaves. They weren't the children of they were
Afterwards.
first, right?
Okay.
They either came, most of them came from Africa to the Caribbean and from places like Haiti and Jamaica and whatever to the Carolinas and
Right.
Georgia
Cuba.
because that temperate zone was just like the place they came from in
Right.
Africa. Okay.
Wow.
I had a paragraph in one story where the slaves were confused. They thought they came back home because the soil was red in Africa, just like it is in Georgia.
Right.
You know, and they thought they had come back home, and they were elated only to find that they were getting ready to be put on top of auction blocks.
Oh.
So I learned how the witch doctors would use different plants that were actually beautiful, but they were poisonous. You know, and I'm like, what? You know, like the seeds from the apple, ricin, you know, is poisonous.
Right.
There's a lot of flowers that cause vomiting.
Yes.
A lot of leaves that they would make tea to soothe them, and the slaves wanted slave healing. And this is why the master in this particular story had paid homage to his witch doctor because he cured his slaves. Because a dead slave wasn't worth anything.
Right.
And they cost maybe $2,000 to $5,000 when they learned what their skills were. And I monetized that when I was writing that. In this day and age, that would be like $238,000
Yep.
in buying power. So they spent a lot of
Lot of
money
money.
to get this.
And they put themselves in a hawk.
Right, for
For that.
sure.
That is so interesting. Wow. Some history. So, your character names.
I looked up names and I found out what they meant, and I wanted to use them for what character they played.
Okay.
Okay, and there was one about an Indian a Cherokee African, because Indians owned slaves too.
They did.
Uh-huh.
They're
And
the
it took place
Cherokees.
in Georgia. So you had the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and Choctaw in
Okay.
Georgia.
Okay.
And
Georgia, Alabama,
yes,
North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee.
Think of all the Indian names of
Yeah.
the rivers, Monongahela, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just saturated with names that are Indian.
And the Trail of Tears was
origin.
mainly to
Yes.
get rid of the Indian plantation
Right,
owners,
Sure, for sure.
so they could take their land.
Right. But
That
the
is-
Indians did
Own
own
slaves. They did.
They did, okay?
Okay.
And so when the Trail of Tears, ordered by Andrew Jackson to have all the Indians to go west of the Mississippi to parts of Oklahoma, and there were biracial Native American
Children.
and African.
Yeah.
They were biracial, and they had a huge riot that I read about when I was
Okay.
doing my research.
Okay.
That the blacks wanted to be Indian because they could say, look at their hair.
Okay.
And their features, and they wanted to be
So they can
enslaved
leave.
So they can leave. But the Native Americans wanted to stay because they wanted to be their burial grounds, and it was a
Right.
huge
And that's
riot about
important.
who was gonna
was
stay
gonna
and
stay.
Who was going to go?
Wow.
It was just mind blowing.
Wow. You really got to learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you take and put all that information? Because I know you used it for your book, but that's a lot of research and a lot of knowledge. I hope that you took and made a part 2 or something.
Yeah, I've talked a lot of things there. Like, did you know? Did you know this?
Yes, yes.
For one thing, still talking about the Trail of Tears. When I said, well, Lady D, will you be over tomorrow? And you'll say, Cynthia, I'll be there, good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Right.
It has
Right.
nothing to do with water. It was the
Right.
Creek Indians. If the Creek Indians didn't rise up after us, I'll
I'll
over
make
and sit.
it.
Yes. So that's what
Right.
that saying has nothing to do with the flood. It's with the creek don't rise.
So they had to speak.
A lot of these old things is all here today.
Yeah, because they had to
So-
use a lot of dialogue
Right.
and a way that they
Right.
could understand without the other
Right.
not knowing.
Right.
In code,
Right.
speaking in codes.
They had a lot of codes. A double-headed, can I say the N-word?
Oh, sure.
A double-headed nigger
Uh-huh.
was what the whites called a black person who could read and write.
Right.
It was just different names that they just like code words that they would, give to them. It was just You know, because you could get hung for
Be able to
knowing how
read.
Knowing how to read. It's, oh man. We've, and you think that we've really come a long way,
I think,
but, what'd you say, sir?
I think we have.
I think we've come a long way.
We've taken a step back
But
in some aspects, but
I would like
think
for
we
our
will.
young adults to really
no
take
more.
home to this history, because this is something that, like she says, we have gotten so far away and our elders have passed on. So the history and the stories that they have to tell, if you don't keep it going, nobody is there to keep it going, to keep telling it, and our younger adults, they really, today, to me, they can't relate, because if they could relate to where our ancestors have went through, I think they would do things a little bit more different, and even just overall how they conduct themselves, with
I don't
a
know.
little bit more pride.
I think this group, the millennials, have more pride than a lot of generations.
You think
I
so?
do think I do so, and
A sector of them do.
not a sector,
Is it
just
majority?
overall, the majority. I really do. And that was another thing I'm finding more fascinating, even when I was talking to my sister and my brother-in-law, two teachers. They're like, those kids have a work ethic that is way better than most people think that is.
Okay, so,
If they are interested,
okay.
that is the key. If they're interested in what they're doing, they have a work ethic that is beyond even a Puritan work ethic.
That's why I think their movement as being described as woke is really
Right.
We are
telling-
now
it's
becoming
telling.
awakened,
Right.
being enlightened.
A
more.
perfect example is Black Lives Matter. And that, that group was started by young ladies. And I think this the way they persevere while having their message been taken another way, hijacked by Russians and doing, but they're staying true to what their message is about. And that's why the group is still surviving and moving on. Because what they're talking about, and they're not letting America forget what it is. Our prison system our justice system is broke. There has to be some equality. But they're going about it, to me, in the right way, and they're persevering. So I think really down is to us, the older group, to keep on bringing stuff like this up, a book.
Yes.
So because they will read it, I find them fascinating in that. Even the ones at our job, I'm kind of surprised, and I think about money so much as I think about, doing it well.
Right.
Now, we have to remind them sometimes. No, you better read. You got bills to pay.
Well, Cynthia,
I have hope.
I would like for you
this
to
is
tell
one.
us how our listeners where can they purchase this
It's
book?
available on Amazon, and I learned from some friends that they went to Barnes and Noble to
Okay.
ask them to have it ordered for them.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
Yes.
And if someone wants to have you come out and speak this month, how can they reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn,
Okay.
and I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
Yes, I can give you my.
Please
Yep,
give our
time.
listeners, if we got time,
Email address.
give that information
Okay.
out, because they're listening.
Okay.
And you never know who may want you to come and speak at the schools. How can they reach you, Cynthia?
My email address is charallen@aol.com.
Okay. Is there a phone number they can call? No. Okay. We'll just keep it like that.
And the Facebook is
Cynthia
Allen.
Allen.
Cynthia Allen,
Right.
and you can purchase her book on Amazon. This is some really good reading. I think you all will
or
really
go into Barnes
enjoy
and Noble
this.
and ask them to get it for you.
Yes. Okay.
It's
Excellent.
really fascinating.
Yes. And this is great for Black History. Well, we're going to wrap our show up, and I really appreciate you
Thank you.
coming on and
Thanks.
sharing. Because I felt like I was in a history class today, just listening to you go and talk
A
about
lot
all of this.
information.
And you actually went to see a plantation.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is what's going on with Sir. Well, wait a minute.
Thank
with
you.
Sir John.
And Lady D.
And we'll be back next Sunday for you. Tune in.